There are multiple men who have reached out to me and said, I love what you're doing on LinkedIn. Please keep posting. That stuff is like a lifeline for me. They will not like my posts because they're afraid of who will see it.
Welcome to episode 43 of Give Yourself Some Leeway with me, your host, Eugene Lee. Today I am joined by Newton Cheng. He's the Director of Health and Performance at Google. And what a job responsibility that is, supporting the physical, mental, social and spiritual health and well-being of Google's global workforce. But Newton also experienced burnout himself, and currently he's on a journey of being a mental health advocate, sharing his story with everyone, and I was so privileged to have him here on the podcast to share his story with you all. So have a listen, let's get straight into it. Have a listen, let me know what you think of Newton Cheng's story. You can reach out to me at eugene.leeway on Instagram, giveyourselfsomeleeway.com, or shoot me an email, eugene@leeway.ie. Thank you, and I really hope you enjoyed today's episode with Newton Cheng. Newton, it's great to have you here on the show and Give Yourself Some Leeway. And I think one thing that I always like to start with is, especially because I want everyone to hear about your burnout story and your experience with burnout. And I found that we follow a similar pattern where when we experience burnout, we tend to hit a rock bottom. And it's that rock bottom that leads us to a journey of, it's that awareness that we need to go on a journey of self-recovery and development. And for some of us on that journey of recovery and self-development, we have this spark or vision that makes us want to serve others. And maybe serving others is part of that self-development journey, or it's simply that we just don't want others to feel that pain that we went through. So what was that journey like for you? And why do you do what you do today?
Well, Eugene, very happy to be here. Just so for some context for your audience, I have been working in the field of health and well-being and its intersections with high performance for over 20 years. I'm also a competitive powerlifter, and I have multiple state, world, national championships and records. So I have this really daunting set of experience around health and well-being and how you perform at a high level. And despite all of that, in January of 2022, I burned out and went on mental health leave. A lot of that was the ups and downs and the stresses of the pandemic, lumped on top of a very intense job and being a husband and father, as well as my life as a competitive athlete, which is also quite stressful. But I knew how to handle all those things, I thought. And the real reason I went on leave was I was struggling with depression and anxiety. I was physically, emotionally, and mentally exhausted. But the real rock bottom for me was that day to day, I was just ashamed and riddled with guilt on how I was showing up as a husband and father. And going on leave was an act of desperation because I didn't know what else to do.
So when it comes to, let's say that with your initial burnout, again, coming from your career was in health and performance, and was it that you didn't see the early signs of burnout, or maybe you just, it's sometimes hindsight is 2020, and if you look back now, you're like, oh, I could see that pattern forming. But was it that you just didn't see those early signs coming into effect?
There were a few stages. So I think first, I knew how to suppress and ignore those signs. And so that goes back a long, long time. So when I started working with a therapist eventually, and I started to understand, what does depression feel like? What does anxiety feel like? I found those feelings actually map out back all the way to high school. I'm 44 now. So the aha for me was like, oh, my mental health has been up and down probably for decades now. I've always been, a high achiever who pushes pretty hard, and so I think that probably came with the territory. But what happened was, as the pandemic started, I could definitely start to feel it. I was more educated. for a while, I think I just denied it, and I tried to, use all the health and well-being tips I knew. I, started meditating more. I really tried to optimize my sleep. I um, used all the resilience and positive psychology tricks I could to just really work on my mindset. But I just started to struggle more and more. And what that looked like was I was irritable with my family. Eventually, I started to struggle to get out of bed. And then eventually got to the point where there were a few mornings where I was so overwhelmed with anxiety of just everything felt like a wave coming at me. And I just felt paralyzed by the fear of it. And I would just kind of curl up in a ball. And it was at that point where actually another leader at Google who 10 years earlier had shared his story around depression and talked about lying in bed feeling paralyzed. That was the aha for me, where I'm like, you cannot deny this anymore. Get help. And so from there, I went to the employee assistance provider and got a therapist. He told me I was showing early signs of burnout. A new therapist that I started seeing a few months later said I was showing major symptoms of depression and anxiety. That was the aha for me, because those symptoms he was calling out, I said, well, I've been feeling those off and on since high school. And I thought this was just what it meant, like to work hard. And he said, well, yes, but this comes with the territory. That's also depression and anxiety. And so then after that, he labeled how I show up as something called high functioning depression, where I can have I can be struggling with depression, but I show up and I still get everything done, and I don't show it to the external world. Sometimes I don't think I even know how to show it to myself. But by that point, I was quite aware of where I was. The other thing is, because I work in health and well-being, I know the data. Microsoft's research they did during 2021 said roughly 1 in 2 people in the global workforce are struggling with burnout at work. And so I knew so many were struggling. And so I started to share where I was at and share that I'm likely to go on mental health leave despite having all this expertise. So that was kind of like the journey to rock bottom. When I came back from work, knowing how many were suffering, and also knowing that I wanted to pierce this stigma problem, where when I first started suspecting that I was struggling, I definitely felt this stigma around, like, well, I don't want to show weakness. Like, I don't want to name these things shame and guilt, like for two reasons. Like, I was afraid of what the reputation or the reputational risk would be. I was also just afraid to, like, once I said it, it was real to me. And so there was a personal development journey to go on there. But coming back from work or to work, I knew how many were suffering, and I knew I wanted to drive change. And so I said, I'm going back into work. I'm not going to leave. And I'm going to speak openly about this. And I don't know what will happen to my reputation, but I do know that if I continue on the way I've been going, I'm going to continue to show up as the husband and father that I do not want to be. And if I leave my job, I've stepped outside the system, and I don't think I'm going to be able to drive change from outside the system as effectively. And so that's why I went back, and that's why I started telling my story wherever I was invited to do so.
So much of what you've just said has resonated with my own journey and my own personal decision after I had burnt out to return to work as well. Because I also started documenting my journey and documenting my story, because I knew that a lot of people, there's a massive stigma around talking about your mental health in the workplace, and especially stress, work-related stress and burnout. Especially I have found among men, because they feel that opening up and talking about their mental health or talking about being burnt out makes them seem like too vulnerable or inadequate or incompetent in their role, and they feel there's such a heavy stigma around it that they don't reach out for help. They just keep it all bottled up and they try to work through it.
Absolutely. I kind of I see it in two ways. We were we were given the culture that we had when we were growing up. We were socialized in a certain way. Men don't cry, tough it out, um, no pain, no gain. And the one I like from Dwayne Johnson is be the hardest worker in the room. Like that's how you achieve. Um, and I try to not vilify it because it's a system we have. We're all in it together. Um, and I can have a lot of, while I can point at the system and say like, this is terrible and this is not helping us. I also I have to have compassion for it because we're all in this together and it's not working for any man. Like they can say um, it's not a high priority problem for them to fix. And they might say like, yeah, I have other things to address. And so I'm not going to change. And that's fine. But I question this stigma, this cultural stigma we've created, and specifically the pressures on men and this conventional sense of masculinity. Does it work for where we're at in society? I would say it's a clear no.
When you say conventional style of masculinity, I feel it's almost like a hyper masculinity as such,
Yes.
that they feel that they have to have this alpha male state. They have to project themselves as an alpha male at all times and show no signs of weakness, and
Yes.
always be the loudest in the room, always be the most outspoken, but never show weakness.
Yes. Like I was in a uh, training session with about 50 other Google directors a few months ago. And we were doing a debrief on an exercise where we were looking at just how we handle complex challenges. And I was about to give like a personal case study and talk about how the situation made me uncomfortable. And then at the last second, I thought, what does uncomfortable mean? It doesn't. It feels like a safe word to me. What do you really feel? And so on the call in front of the 50 other Google directors, I said, it made me feel scared. And instantly, like both men and women, like it opened up. You heard other people saying, like, yeah, like I'm afraid too in this situation. Like, yeah, I'm also scared. And now we can actually support each other and carry those things together at that level. But before that, we were all going to just dance around it and say words like discomfort and then go carry how we actually feel about it by ourselves. How exactly is that helpful? I don't understand. So I'm making the active choice to just keep showing up differently and to go down one or more layers and start to name like, no, I'm not going to use the safe word. I'm going to say I'm scared. I'm going to say I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to say this week I'm struggling with my depression, but I think I can still show up in these ways.
Having a space for discussion, as you said, instead of hiding it and just saying I feel uncomfortable and hiding behind the safe word, by showing that extra emotion, saying that you're scared, that you're kind of reaching that deeper emotion, and connecting with those 50 other team or leaders on a deeper level, by expressing that you're scared too, and it got them to open up as well. I found that, especially when I started opening up about my mental health as well, that I at first received a lot of negative backlash, being, you can't talk about that, you can't talk about your mental health in the workplace, you shouldn't be creating content about your mental health in the workplace. It'll probably put you out of your job if you start talking about your mental health. And I found that a lot of people found the conversation uncomfortable, and it was in an effort to get me to shut up and stop making content. But if anything, it does fuel me more. I was like, so many people are uncomfortable talking about their mental health, so
Yeah.
I should be talking about it more to normalize it.
Let me offer a perspective on that conversation where someone says you can't talk about that. Everyone's different, so this might not be true, but is it possible that what they're actually saying is, I can't talk about it, and therefore when you do it, it stokes that fear in me?
Yes,
I think that for a lot of people, that's actually what's going on.
yeah, I think that's exactly where it's coming from. It's not that they're hating on you; they're kind of fearing that reflection on themselves, that they don't want you to stop talking about it. They're just afraid of speaking up about it themselves. So that's where the discomfort is coming from, or that's where the fear is coming from.
Yes, I think the sense I get, it's if you are showing up in a way that is progressive in that way, and they picture themselves being pulled in that direction of progress, it implies like, oh, I'm going to have to pierce that veil. I'm going to have to look at those ugly sides of myself that I put aside because I said they're unlovable or unuseful and they're not part of me. And if you haven't done that work, that's really scary.
I just find that it's difficult to find data specifically on men burning out, and it's whether is it that they're not comfortable in sharing that they're burning out, and that's why it's hard to find the data, or do you think other factors come into play?
I think that's definitely one factor. So I'll name a few things. Um, there are multiple men who have reached out to me and said, I love what you're doing on LinkedIn. Please keep posting. That stuff is like a lifeline for me. They will not like my posts because they're afraid of who will see it. So the veil of stigma there, like I have not seen a woman do the same thing, and I'm not saying that they aren't there, but so for my small sample size, that is an oddity or a pattern, an odd pattern that I'm seeing. So that's one thing. I think there's like a general self-awareness thing where maybe they are burned out, but just like me, I was socialized to push that down and deny it. And so I think there's some of that. I think the last thing is it might not, their struggles might not manifest as burnout, but if you look at other like really bad outcome data around really bad outcomes, like things like violence, substance abuse, suicide, a lot of that stuff is dominated by men. So I have to ask, what is going on there? And so it might not result in workplace burnout, but it might result in something far worse.
Yeah, it's when the emotion is bottled up and they express it in alternative ways rather than addressing the core emotion.
Yeah, there's the stereotypical news story you get where the man who's just committed an act of mass violence, and their neighbors saying, "Oh, they were always the quiet, nice one."
Again, it's just not having that space to express it, and that maybe it's that lack of connection as well. I know that Jim Young covers it in the expansive intimacy, where it's that lack of connection, or maybe it's um, that hyper masculinity again, where men feel that um, they're so focused on, or they're so results driven, that they don't take a moment to step back and say, I need to express my emotions, I need to express my vulnerabilities, and get the help to to um to find alignment and purpose, rather than just constantly going, I need to be successful, I need um to be the leader, to be the responsible one, to be the one that everyone looks to but never looks for help.
Yeah, I think there are some who are in that bucket where they're not taking the step back. I have compassion for where a lot of these struggling men might be. There's this a man named Ashanti Branch who works with mainly inner city youth populations. He's in Oakland, California. He also hosts his own podcast called Taking Off the Mask. And he was a school teacher, and he's moved on from that and instead created this foundation where he works with young men, because the way that he puts it is we're socialized as young men, like the only negative emotion you can express is anger. And so you can't be sad, you can't be lonely, you can only be angry, and that gets expressed, violently. And so if you think about, we have a culture that raises so many men socialized in that way, they don't even have the awareness, the skills, and the vocabulary to take that step back that you're talking about, to say what's going on here, because it's all been suppressed, and none of the nuances of all that other stuff have been taught.
And when it comes to, let's say, trying to approach someone like that, and to, let's say, maybe getting on the first step to realizing that or having that awareness, where do you start with that?
I think relationship. It's like, if you come from a place of care and you recognize where they're at, it's got to start with you building a trusting friendship, because if that's really where they're at, to get to a better place, it's going to take a lot of support. And so it's, I don't have this massively scalable solution to this. um, this will happen at scale, not over the course of like the next year or two, but over decades. But for the one person in your orbit who you might be able to affect change with, it starts with you showing up with true love and compassion and a desire to connect with them, um, not just to help them, but to help yourself heal as well. Because it can't be you doing something for them. It's like you need to build a relationship together, and then from there, move forward together for both of you.
And in a way, is going into the workplace and showing, let's say, expressing your own mental health, your own journey, and expressing your emotions that way, are you providing a space for them to come to you that way? Or are you, let's say, are you just being more open as a person in general, let's say, in whatever way you show up in life, and that you're making yourself more accessible for them to approach you, as opposed to you reaching out to them if you identify it in them?
I do a little of all, um,
Okay.
in the available time I have. So the all the talks and presentations I've been giving. So I've been telling my story wherever I'm invited to for close to a year now, and I committed to saying, as long as there's interest, I'll keep going for at least 12 months. We are approaching the 12-month mark, and I've now done dozens of these talks, based on requests from the audience for those talks. I've evolved it into multiple workshop formats, and I now have speaking engagements all the way till November. So I think, just in terms of putting it out there, there's this huge, huge, huge pull for this conversation. So that's one thing. Now, as I put those conversations out there, they kind of act as like a beacon to those who want that type of connection. So a lot of people will reach out to me and just say like, "Hey, can we chat?" And like, that's a wonderful starting point. Like, I don't need to take it any further than that. Like, yes, we can chat, and I'm going to show up with love and compassion and see where this goes. And so far, I have a 100% success rate, because who doesn't need more love and compassion in their life right now? And then finally, there are people just in your orbit who you might sense like something's off. So just extend an outreach. How are you doing? You want to grab lunch? You want to grab a coffee? And just let it unfold. I don't need to push it into a therapy session, nor am I qualified to deliver a therapy session. But just being there, present and truly interested in them and their well-being, the connection always gets made.
Yeah, I really love that. It's showing up as, just showing up as a human, and being there for others. I think it's simplicity at its finest. It's just being authentic and being open and being yourself, and being open to having that conversation with the people who want to have that conversation, and also providing an invitation to them as well, to the ones who are still a little bit uncomfortable, just a kind of an extended hand, being like, hey, we don't have to have this conversation now, but I am opening up an invitation to, we can talk about it now or we can talk about it later.
Yes, absolutely. It's kind of like just the availability.
Yes.
Like that Google leader who told his story 10 years ago. I didn't know I needed to hear that until 10 years later. But knowing that and having that story, like it made so much difference. So once I got there, I actually hunted down his contact info just a few months ago, and he has since left Google and is taking some personal time. I sent him an email to just let him know, like, hey, that was life changing for me, and I want you to know you did that.
And the way you came across his content, was it like a recording or let's say an article or something, or was it something that he's still doing 10 years later, providing that speech or that story?
It was actually so it came in two ways. One, I think as a much larger mental health awareness campaign that Google was doing, he stepped up to say, I want to tell my story. And so they launched it as a standalone video. But um, they actually took some insights from that and they embedded them in senior manager training to say, hey, if you go and run a pretty large, complex organization, your mental health is going to be challenged. Here's what that can look like so that you are aware of what it might look like and you can get help. And so I saw it first via that training, and then I saw the campaign video later. And so it hit me multiple ways. And kudos to the people who had the foresight to say, let's use this and get it into the ecosystem wherever we can.
I love that. I love that they took it on board to present it to senior management, and increasing that awareness. How would you approach if you felt, let's say, you're turning to work after experiencing burnout, and you feel that it was in your workplace that you first experienced burnout, or maybe you're feeling it from other colleagues, and you want to have that conversation with management to, maybe you feel there's a burnout culture present, and you want to help push that burnout culture towards maybe a growth culture, or at least increase the awareness so that people do reach out for the help they need. How would you start that conversation with management?
I think a few things. One is the problem. What you'll probably see is the problem is systemic. Like you can't isolate it to like, oh, there's one bad apple, and we'll have a talk with Terry or John or Jeff, and it'll all be fixed. I hope that's your situation and it's that simple. But it's probably systemic where it might be part of the culture, your ways of working, the way the business operates. And so it's going to be complex. So I think step one is you need to think about where is the system at today and what are they open to hearing. So usually I think about this as like, just being very pragmatic. How does what I'm going to tell them benefit them and the system? So anchoring your message on the business to say like, hey, I see this going on with some of our people. I don't think this is serving the business in these ways. Here's some things I think we could try differently. And you need to make sure those are sized where it's real easy to say yes to. So, like one of my strategies is I either ask and say, can we try this? Or what I do is an offer and I say, I'm just going to go do this and it will cost you nothing. And I'll tell you what I learned. And I do a lot of those micro experiments. And it does two things. One, it just gets the message into the ecosystem. So it's a little bit of a drip campaign to just get people talking about it. And then two, as long as I haven't triggered any defensiveness or fears, there's no reason to say no. And I can say like, yeah, I'm bringing you on this journey as the leader. So if I make progress here, you get credit too. Who wouldn't say yes to that?
Yeah, I like that approach. I think I think where sometimes where the struggle is, it's where you are in the line of command and it can feel intimidating approaching management, and they might be on the defensive straight away and be like, "Oh, you're just bringing another problem. I have so much on my plate already. I don't want to take this on." But as you said, you're coming to them and you're saying, "Look, I want to take this on myself, and I'll come back. I'll come back with the results. And if it works, if it doesn't work, if it does work, and there's a positive impact, of course, as a leader who approved of it, you get the credit for that, and or that you helped to implement this change." So yeah, selling it in that way to help to implement it. I actually hadn't thought of that approach before.
Yeah, I think there's that approach, and that's the external facing one. The internal soul searching conversation that you need to have, and I'll need to make this the last answer. I have to jump to another meeting, unfortunately. But is I think when you step into the system and you want to take this type of risk, the calculus we often do is, if this goes poorly, I lose my job, and therefore I lose X amount of recurring income. What we don't ask ourselves is, by staying in the system, what is the cost of that? And those two things are really hard to compare, but you're clearly in a place where the system's not working for you. So I think you need to have a conversation of, for what would I be willing to lose this job? And if you can get clear on that and know, like, yeah, I'm willing to do these things, and even if I lose the job, you have freedom to operate in the system and drive change as you best see fit. Because what do you have left to lose? You've already put it all on the table.
I love that. I love that. Newton, if people want to hear more about you and what you do and maybe get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to find you?
So in terms of my mental health advocacy, please go to LinkedIn. You can just find me by searching my name. If you want to get in touch with me, I post a lot of content, again, on mental health advocacy and burnout in the workplace. I am available for presentations and workshops, but I do have very limited availability, but always open to chat about it if the stars align. And then the other place you can find me is on Instagram under the name Newton Cheng, and that is much more focused on my powerlifting journey, but I do weave in some of what I do with mental health.
Brilliant, Newton. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're on a tight schedule as well. Again, booked up until November, so I really do appreciate you taking the time for this call today.
Happy to be here, Eugene. Thank you for the opportunity.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if you did, could you take a moment to leave a 5-star rating on Spotify, because it really helps to improve the rating of the show, so that it's more easily found by others who might enjoy the show just as much as you. And maybe take a moment to share with family, friends, or a loved one, because what better way to help break the stigma around mental health than to have that conversation with those closest to us. As always, reach out to me at giveyourselfsomeleeway.com, on social media, eugene.leeway, or shoot me an email, eugene@leeway.ie, because even though Give Yourself Some Leeway is like an outlet for me, I also want to give the highest value to you, my listeners. So I really depend on your feedback. Let me know what you like, what you don't like, what you'd like to hear more about. So until I hear from you, take care of yourself. Maybe have a glass of water, crack a smile, and think of a way to prioritize your own self-care. So until next time, take care.